Hello and welcome to the February episode of Rare. And today I have the pleasure of welcoming our guest, Dr. Selena Freisens. So first, let me introduce Selena. Selena is a physician with 25 years of experience in pharma and biotech, of which 23 years were in rare diseases. She spent 20 years in Genzyme, or Sanofi Genzyme, pioneering in medical and commercial capabilities on global, regional, and local scales. And during the last 10 years, Selena has been serving in global executive medical affairs roles. So Selena, you decided to focus today on a topic of repurposing drugs for rare diseases. So can you tell us why you chose this topic?
First of all, Laura, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really thrilled to be taking part in this wonderful Rare blog. I chose the topic because I wanted to increase awareness and sensitize the community, rare disease community on this very, very important topic. Repurposing drugs from common disease, used in common diseases for the treatment of rare diseases is really offering a huge opportunity to bring new therapies for the treatment of patients with major unmet needs in rare diseases. And they are an alternative to the novel drug development. In common diseases, there are a number of successful examples so far of repurposing. And in rare diseases over the past decade, we see a positive trend, but the uptake remains very slow and limited because there are some obstacles actually on our way so far. So today I'd like to discuss some values and obstacles which are being faced, and also I'd like to share my personal opinion on this matter.
Great. So, okay, well, let's start with clarifying the definition of drug repurposing. So what is repurposing?
So drug repurposing, or it's called differently drug repositioning, is developing an existing drug for a new regulatory approved indication. It means that you have approved drug for one disease, but along the way you may find that this drug may be beneficial for other disease or diseases. So you then develop and approve this drug for the treatment of these other diseases.
Okay, great. And what's the value of drug repurposing?
So drug repurposing has a huge value. It basically can make new treatments faster, more affordable, and more accessible to patients. So why is that? It is basically because you already have an existing knowledge of this drug that's been used in original indication, and you can leverage that originally existing knowledge to the development in the new indication. First of all, that existing knowledge can be, for example, generated knowledge on the drug properties, on mode of action, even safety data, for example. It can be used in millions of patients over a long time period, which is already a very, very good, let's say, learning coming from that drug. That can also reduce time needed for studies, in particularly preclinical, analytical studies, maybe early stages of the studies. It can also lower the trial's failure rate. We know that there's a high trial failure rate, and here you already know the drug, so you basically can really predict better which drug is really fitting to which disease already at the early stages. And ultimately, this may lead to reduction of developmental costs, which also triggers the lower healthcare costs and more affordability, more accessibility to drug globally. So this type of the drug repositioning is actually shown to be very useful in emergency situation, like for example in COVID pandemic, we had in a very, very short time period about 100 repurposed drugs that moved into clinical trial for COVID, and 4 drugs receiving an FDA approval during that emergency situation. So I think in the future, this will also be a very important use of repurposing medicines. What's interesting is that the bulk of medicines are generic, and most of them have lost the patent. So there is a major opportunity out there. One example is WHO's Anti-Cancer Fund, which identified around 300 medicines that could potentially be repurposed as new cancer treatments. Lastly, there is a need for stakeholder collaboration when it comes to repurposing. So every stakeholder has its role, and ideally, patients should initiate or initiate this stakeholder gathering and also look for resources, then funding, and then academia could, for example, run some first trials, mode of action, for example, or even clinical trials, and then the industry could then bring it further into either clinical trial and registration, and then to the commercialization. So this stakeholder collaboration may all pool resources, expertise, and data, and also make it more efficient and effective to the patient.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't actually realize about the 300 medicines that could be repurposed. It's amazing. So why is drug repurposing of special interest for rare diseases?
Yeah, because we know all that in rare disease we have a huge unmet need. We have around 10,000 rare diseases, of which only 5% have approved treatments. So there's a real major unmet need. Development in rare diseases is also can be very challenging and costly because of the low patient numbers, because of complexity of the disease, but also lack of disease knowledge about the, for example, disease biopathology. As with other developments, there's always a high risk of failure, as we know, and it's also a very lengthy process. It takes about 10 to 15 years in average to develop a treatment and bring it to the patient, from discovery to access to patient access. Lastly, there's always, with rare diseases, we know usually these are complex products and may have high manufacturing costs. Plus, there are fewer patients to be treated in commercial settings. So these therapies are usually very costly at the end, and cumulatively may have impact on the healthcare budgets. So repurposing may speed the availability of cost-effective drugs to the patients. As we say, as I said, in the rare diseases, drug development is not able to meet such huge unmet need. Just thinking about 95% of rare diseases still have no therapy. And with time needed to develop the drugs, it is absolutely impossible to meet this huge unmet need. Therefore, we need to find new routes to develop more treatments more quickly and more cheaply and bring them to the patients.
Yeah. Well, can you share any successful examples so far of drug repurpose for rare disease?
Yes, I found in the literature when I was preparing for this talk. So I found that, for example, propranolol, which is used in the past for hypertension, has also found to have impact on infantile hemangioma and got approved for this treatment, for this disease, but also for some similar other rare diseases. So it's very important to say that if you repurpose drug for one disease, it may also be a pipeline in a product. So you can use this drug for more diseases, for example, with similar pathomechanism. Another example is fenfluramine, which is an peptide suppressor. It was approved for obesity patients in the 60s and withdrawn 90s due to cardiovascular adverse events. But it has been shown that it has positive effect on seizures. So later it was approved for Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. So that is also a very nice example of how a drug may be, with adverse events, may not be good for one disease, but because of the risk values for treatments where there are no for the disease where there are no existing treatments, it may also have a big value in these type of diseases.
Mm. So how do you see innovation versus repurposing?
So they should not be overlapping. I think it's actually repurposing is not a substitute to the innovation. and should not be a substitute for innovation. De novo drugs development and also drug discovery is really important, and they are needed because they lead to more optimal treatment, to overall better healthcare outcomes, to healthcare savings generally. However, as we said, drug discovery and development is a long, costly, and high-risk process. Nonetheless, I think that the repurposing needs to maintain the highest standards of safety and efficacy for patients, and it cannot have economic objective.
Are there regulatory initiatives and platforms to support stakeholders in advanced drug repurposing?
Yes, Laura, there are a number of those initiatives, in particular over the past decade, and I think one can find so much information out there. I can mention a couple, like EMA's new legislation proposal for in 2023, which incentivizes drug repurposing efforts and basically proposes 4 years of patent protection for such drugs, which is very important. I'll come to that a little bit later. There's also an EMA pilot project STEMP, which assists nonprofit organizations like academic institutions to actually generate the data which is going to lead to regulatory approval. I think this is very important because you have to really know where to look and what endpoints to look for and how to collect them. And it's very important to get regulatory early ahead of time, in discussions with regulators earlier and ahead of time, and get scientific advice. Then there is a remedy for all, also EU-funded 5-year research initiative, as well as REPO for EU. They all have a purpose to have more systematic and efficient ways of repurposing drug. CureID is an FDA-supported online platform for real-world evidence, which actually identifies potential associations of existing drugs and new treatment indications using the real-world evidence database. And I think what I found also very interesting is IRC, Drug Repurposing Guidebook, which offers very specific tools and also some practices which can be very helpful when you start repurposing drug.
So why is repurposing drugs for rare diseases not more widely implemented to date? Like, what are the obstacles for repurposing drugs in rare disease?
Yes, and that's a great question, and I think the opportunities are definitely insufficiently exploited. Number one issue is the high risk for industry still, due to lack of any protection in the market from a generic brand, because most of these drugs have generic origin and they are already have generics in the market. So there is a risk of substitution by other generics which have low market prices. So basically, industry is disincentivized to really commercially invest here. In addition to that, academic researchers seem to lack time and funding, or maybe knowledge even to really lead and begin in vivo or in vitro or in vivo studies. I also think patients' initiatives are low, even though I found a lot of good initiatives on the websites. I think that there is still a lack of awareness and knowledge about the value of drug repurposing and what can patients do. What can patients do to help to support this? Also, there could be negative incentives in the national healthcare system when it comes to reimbursement of repurposed drugs. So, because some national healthcare systems or reimbursement agencies may tend to approve the cheapest generic brand. So, if you have 3 or 4 products and one is approved for repurposing in a different indication, it may be an option for others to take more cheaper brands for the same indication. There's also lack of business model, or I would say pricing model. So this is something that needs to be taken forward. And lastly, I think overall in the past decade, all successful cases of repurposing drugs for rare diseases have happened by chance or during the clinical trial or during the real-world use. We found out by chance that this drug can do this or may have another indication or may have another mode of action. So we need actually a more systematic and rational strategy for that.
Yeah, so what can we expect in the future? Like, how will things move forward?
So there's already a positive trend, and definitely climate is changing, and I think it will continue to move in a positive direction for sure. But we can do more to facilitate that. First of all, I think utilizing digital strategies like machine learning or artificial intelligence in identifying potential drug repurposing candidates have been implemented over the past several years, but it can be even more utilized to facilitate that. So these machine learnings can actually analyze information, publicly available literature, websites, and also predict new therapeutic uses. Such an example is for every cure linked map. I have to read here, ranked all 3,000 FDA-approved drugs to treat all 12,000 human diseases and generated 36 million evaluations. So there is a lot of opportunity to utilize such digital strategies. In addition, in silico NemoCAD approach was used during COVID-19 to predict drugs that may be repurposed for against COVID-19, and they are using actually retrospective clinical data from the medical records to find the candidates for repurposing. Moreover, real-world data and real-world evidence is generating more and more relevance, in particularly with regulators. So I think Darwin, for example, database may have more importance in the future for drug repurposing. Patient engagement is really critical, and I think talking about low awareness and knowledge in the patient among patients, I think one can initiate a lot of educational programs for patients and can really stimulate in such a way leadership for patients to initiate and fund such efforts. Lastly, regulatory initiatives for industries are very important, and I welcome the EMA decision for their new legislation. And also, I think this is really important because, as we said, number one obstacle is the high risk for industry. So we really need to sort this out. At the country level, at the national level, there's a need for policy change in order to install more sustainable revenue models for industries. So one example is Dutch initiative, Fast and Rare Netherlands, which are focusing on development of a framework for drug repurposing, evaluating required investment and optimal pricing models. I think this is really great, and I think many countries probably can learn from this example, from this model. I also want to highlight following that repurposed drugs are often mistaken to be generic drugs. This and also expected to have very low price or generic price. But that's not the case because you really need a high risk investment. So you have to find a new clinical trial. So you need to find the registration, the PV, the communication, legal matters, even manufacturing of new posology formulation, also reimbursement. So that all requires an investment, and there cannot be expected that the drug is actually developed in a very new indication. In conclusion, Laura, as we can see, we still have a long way to go, but it seems that we are already on a runway, and I'm hopeful that this discussion may also trigger some thinking and maybe action, and that we can see much more drugs being developed for those treatments, for those diseases that have no treatments or very limited treatments in rare diseases.
That's great. Thank you so much, Selena. It's great to have an insight on drug repurposing, particularly within the rare disease space. So thank you for taking the time to feature.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.